It's very well known in the world of venture building, incubators, and startups. Ideas are cheap. I'm sorry to say everyone has them. The money is in the execution. The money is in the courage in following through and the
Mm.
bravery to following through. I believe in like building a business is 80% logic and 20% magic. And that magic comes sometimes in that team chemistry.
Mm. Welcome everyone to How Would You Build It? It's episode 19. And right now I feel like I've gone back in time because I'm sitting in front of Matt, who I worked with not too long ago. Matt, thank you for joining. It's so good to see you again.
No, thank you for having me, Bobby. It has been a while, but it feels like a stone throw away.
Yeah, 100%. Now, people are going to wonder, like, who's Matt and why we're bringing Matt on. But, at the end of the day, Matt, working with you was so insightful, like the way you approached people looking for business ideas or when they came with the idea, how would we validate that idea? And it was such a great process to kind of work with you on during that time. And so I thought it would be a great opportunity for us. Here on the show, we constantly talk about the opportunities within different industries, whether it's education, logistics, AI, you name it. Like there's a lot of opportunities out there, and a lot of people are wondering, okay, so if there's an opportunity there, how do I go about figuring out how to approach it? Like, how do I know that this is something I need to pursue? So I thought you could sort of help us in understanding that. So Matt, just kind of tell us your generic approach to validating whether a opportunity is worth pursuing.
Yeah, definitely. So I often I premise this whenever a new founder comes to me or anyone actually with an idea or a potential founder. I often think of the meme or I use the meme of this little girl in the fields chasing butterflies, much like when you're a 5-year-old and you are chasing butterflies. There's an opportunity, and each butterfly is an opportunity. There's an opportunity, there's an opportunity. And it's like these very young founders just see opportunities. And to be honest, like it is a world of opportunities, but like you have to pick a lane at some stage, and it's
Mm.
how you pick that lane and get focused. And I think over the last couple of years, I mean, my methodologies have changed a few times because the market has changed, the tools have changed. But what we really preach is to get to market, or I begin to preach is to get to market as quick as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And there's what I mean by that is getting to your customer as quick as possible and having the conversation that you need to have as quick as possible. And there are these great models online when it comes to validating a business idea. I mean, this is all free public IP. You can Google it. But I mean, the first thing I tell a founder is, great, that's a great opportunity, but what is the problem statement? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, Matt, there's a great potential in this market in real estate for, say, vertical integration, for an example. And I say, fantastic, but what is the actual problem you're solving? And generally, it's a good start when the founder actually experiences the problem,
Mm-hmm.
but they'll be like, Matt, I do this every single day and this is what I do. And then I often ask them, so how many other people have you spoken to? And then they say no one. That might be important because this might be a you problem or it might be a
Mm.
market problem.
Mm.
And you often ask people, and I preach this to founders, and they're like, why don't they ask someone? And then they say, because someone's going to steal my idea. It's such a great idea.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very well known in the world of venture building, incubators, and startups. And ideas are cheap. I'm sorry to say everyone has them. The money is in the execution. The money is in the courage in following through and the
Mm.
bravery to following through and the grit to follow through.
Mm.
So, and then you get to the second stumbling block is when the minute I ask them or I challenge them to speak to the market is, or speak to other people to see if they experience, they get scared. Why? Because their belief in their idea is challenged.
Mm.
Because someone like you I will approach another person that I respect in the same industry, and then I'll say, do you have this problem? And then they might challenge your idea. This is the first time your idea will ever get challenged. And if you know you're onto something, you truly believe it, you'll be able to stand tall in that. Number
Mm.
one, or number two is take their feedback and implement their feedback and evolve your idea.
Mm-hmm.
So, but that's a very step one. I always say have a conversation with someone more than me. But if you want to get to the theory around a business idea or validating a business idea, we work. I didn't take much from Varsity. I'm very thankful for Varsity, but I remember there used to be hypotheses, and
Mm-hmm.
this was in your thesis if you written a thesis. And the only time I've seen hypotheses again was in venture building. 8 years along my career, I came around the term hypothesis. So I was like, wow, this actually. So what I mean by that is, in venture building is you have a hypothesis. Is 30% of the market or 30% of real estate agents will use your product or use this feature and are willing to pay for this feature.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you're assuming. Now, based on an initial business idea with no data, you have assumptions and you have hypotheses. These are the things that you hypothesize.
So what's the
Now
difference for people? Because you'd always think that assumptions and hypotheses are the same thing. How do you differentiate between the two?
So an assumption is I assume that real estate agents will use a tool that better canvasses opportunities for them, or my tool.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a hypothesis goes one layer deeper. It's more granular because it speaks to your tool. An assumption speaks to your tool, and a hypothesis will actually speak to an element within it. In other words, like they will be willing to use a web app. They will be willing to pay $10 for this application. And it's in that definite. So it's like taking in one assumption and making 5 hypotheses that underpin that assumption.
Okay. Cool.
If that makes sense. And what we do is we go through a rigorous process. I'm not saying it has to be rigorous. I'm saying that if you have an idea as a person, what you should do is you should just start mapping these assumptions. What are all these assumptions? And you should come up with about 10 or 15. And there's another model which people should look at when it comes to validating business ideas, and it speaks to 3 concepts. Sorry, I'm trying to speak as I'll give examples for each of these now, which is your idea desirable? Is it desirable by people? Is there an actual need or problem that it solves for? Desirability. Now, it is the most important thing for any business idea. If it is not desirable, you do not have a business. And so desirability is the most important factor. Then there's other 2 factors which more speak to a business, which are, is it feasible? And this is very important because this speaks to, is this possible? Like we all want to build a house. But is it feasible for, number one, for me to build that house? Can I get the builders? Do the tools exist? Does the materials exist? Can I easily get them? Is there a way to get a loan? So the feasibility, is there space for that? There's many things around feasibility. So that's why like a house is a great example. And then the last one is speaks to viability. And viability speaks to the commercial side of a business model. It speaks to, is there enough money, or can I make enough money to make this viable? So that speaks to rather capital and pricing. Now, these are the 3 things. So desirable, is it feasible, and is it viable? And assumptions are mapped to these 3 theoretical ideas. And that's the way that the model works. And up until a couple of months ago, we used to prioritize each of them the same, and I used to prioritize each of these the same. So the model work is you have feasibility, viability, and desirability. Each of these have assumptions, and each of these assumptions have hypotheses. And each hypothesis will have, now we're getting one layer deeper, to an experiment. Now, this is a very fancy name for just doing something to prove that. So this is what I teach a founder. So you'll be a founder, you have a business idea in property, a SaaS or software as a service within property, and you assume that estate agents want to solve a canvassing idea by getting inventory quicker. So I will say, okay, your assumption is that estate agents find it very difficult to canvass for new properties. So that's your assumption. So I'll be like, okay, do we know that? They'll be like, no, we don't know that. And I will then go one layer deep and say, a hypothesis is estate agents are willing to pay $10 for a tool that will show them better inventory. So I'll be like, okay, that's our hypothesis. Then the final layer is I need to prove or disprove a hypothesis. So what happens then is we have to do something to actually do that, which is comes in the form of one of two things, to be honest. It comes in quantitative data or qualitative data. And to an early stage founder, I really believe in qualitative data. It is easier to do and is more insightful at that early stage. And what qualitative data is, yeah?
No, you go for it. I was going to say, you just kind of differentiate between the two so people understand the difference between what they are, because it's quite important.
Qualitative data is actually really more insightful data, is more of an interview. So I'm having an interview with you about an idea in which I ask you a series of questions. I have an interview guide and I create these questions for you. You give me feedback and then I make some notes as well as, some feedback to my questions. Quantitative data is much more data driven. Which is survey results, which is scales, Likert scales, yes and no answers, probabilities. So qualitative data is when we really want to look into the nitty gritty or the genome of an idea, or the core of the idea. And quantitative data is more testing that idea at scale. I can solve a problem for these 10 people. Can I solve it for, does this problem exist for 1,000 people? But I tell any founder, any single founder, I said, for the next 6 months of our lives, we need to solve this problem for 10 people and we solve it well. If you can solve this problem for 10 people and they're willing to pay for that, I can promise you now, we can find another 10,000 people very similar to your 10 people. And that's where founders get very overwhelmed. In your very early stage, you must never, ever think about hundreds of thousands, or you're going to become a millionaire, or, this is Amazon. The next best, next Amazon or the next Facebook. No, I say your life needs to revolve around 10 people, solving a problem for 10 people. And if you can do that well, you might have a business.
Yeah. So one of the biggest things that we've been talking a lot about on the show is the actual, everyone talks about you need to get revenue, especially in this day and age where at the moment, the current economic climate, there's not as much venture funding going around. It's quite thin, and you need, especially in a South African market, you're not going to get that funding very easily. And then second of all, if you are, people want to see what kind of sales you've already got, what kind of revenue you've been able to generate already. So how do you kind of coach a founder to help them find potentially a pricing model that will validate whether this idea will work?
It's a great question. And pricing models are complicated beasts, and you need data points. In order to get data points on pricing, you have to have a product first. And so gone are the days of raising a lot of money on a very big idea when you had to build a monolithic app. I always tell other founders that I'm in the business of building wedges. That's what I'm in the business of building. And what I mean by a wedge is a wedge into a market, is an entry point to a market. So the market is big, or I'm using real estate for an example because it's what's going. That value chain is long and the size of the prize, and you want to say create a monolithic app to solve for this. In order to do that monolithic app, you have to raise a lot of money to build said app. So it's this, this chicken and the egg scenario.
Exactly.
But what you actually have to do is you have to take your big idea and bring it down 10 to 15 to 20 notches to a single feature. A single thing, because what they want to see is they want to see some data, some evidence. So you cannot have a pitch deck with just an idea. It has to show that you've done the work. So if you're trying to send off your pitch deck to 10 investors because you have a great idea and it tells this beautiful narrative of this beautiful purpose, but at the end of the day, there's no data, or there's no, you haven't put in the hard yards. Then there's a problem. So what I say that we need to put in the hard yards, and you need to put that into your pitch deck. So to get that funding is, depending on how much funding you have available, how much you can bootstrap it, that data point could look like a low code app that does one thing. A user logs in and solves a simple problem. It could actually look like just 100 interviews, because you do not have any dev know-how. You cannot do that. But if you can tell an investor that I've interviewed 100 people, that means that you've spent upwards of 300 hours probably, because an hour an interview, 2 hours post-interview. Now you've spent like maybe 400 or 500 hours around this business idea. Now that already tells an investor that this guy's he's done this team has done the yards. They've actually like really taken the time to do that.
But what about the theory that you don't, just on the I know you're using it as an example, but they say that you only need to really do 5 interviews to really get a feel for whether you're onto something or not, or if your kind of checking is accurate.
So exactly. So that could be after you've got your 5 interviews, but you haven't done the yards. Where else have you done the yards? Like, that's what I mean by that. Is
how
like,
do you take the information and
if you've tried to put together a software and you're not a developer, but you've really tried and you found your friend and you spent some money and you built something, these are all stories that are very important. Do not be shy of these stories with investors. They want to know that you really believe in this idea to the extent that you are trying to do that. That's the way that all businesses are built. But if all you've done is put together 20 slides PowerPoint presentation around an idea and had 5 interviews, I can promise you now, on the 3rd question, if you even get to the stage of being considered, the 3rd question, that investor will easily be able to tell that you have not interrogated your idea, or your idea has not been interrogated enough. And then within 10 minutes, you will be nervous, you will be not being able to answer their questions, and your pitch would be gone.
So what has been the biggest kind of attribute that you've seen with founders at this point when they have an idea? Maybe they know the right people, so they think they can get funding quite easily, but they have this idea and they really want to pursue it. You spoke about feasible, viable, and what's the other one? Feasible, viable,
desirable.
And desirable. Yeah, desirable being quite a big one, because that's, everyone's got the idea, but is it wanted, and does someone want to pay for it? So what are you seeing? Can you give an example potentially of someone that's come in thinking they've got it? They don't need to do all of these things. What is like a potential trend that you've seen within founders when they come to you for help?
A trend it's a really good question, because over the last, you would believe it or not, over the last year, no founding team or business is actually similar as much as we think that they are, much as I thought they were. But often one of the biggest things on a founder's mind is, where do I go next? What do I do next? Because as much as an early stage founder with an idea has opportunity all over the place. Like, he has an opportunity, but even when you go on the journey of a business and you get out the gates to your established founder, you have an idea, you have a bit of an app, that problem does not go away. What happens is you have more opportunities. I can pivot my business here, I can pivot my business there. So I'm actually seeing with a lot of founders is, how do I prioritize? What do I prioritize? And that's probably one of the hardest questions, because no one does have a crystal ball, and there's a lot of uncertainty in the market.
But I like what you said earlier, because it's about how quickly can you start learning, right? So I always talk about what is the smallest amount that we can do that we can start learning, right? So you've spoken nicely about like the assumptions, the hypotheses, and the experiments. I always try and say, well, what experiments are we running? How are we getting the data from those experiments so that we can understand what the next thing is to prioritize? Instead of trying to, let's just use it, but to waterfall this, right? We're going to do it all. We're going to do all of these things. We're going to spend 3 months researching the market. We're going to spend 3 months interviewing people. We're going to spend 3 months doing this. How much can we do in a much short amount of time? And that's kind of what I always preach.
Agreed. No, you're 100% right. And what I often preach to early stage founders, just to go back to another idea, is something that I've also tell anyone to do. If you're not sure what to do with your idea, I can tell you now, the best thing that I say is go and sell your idea. I've actually pivoted recently to the sentiment of venture builder, you have a venture builder, you have an incubator that builds your company. What you actually need is something what I believe strongly in is a venture seller. Growth is the hardest part of any company. I'm not discounting the fact that building, developing, coding, operations, they're all critical. Like, that is all very important. But one of the hardest things is growth. And one of the hardest things for a founder to do is if you want to test your idea or if you want to know what to focus on, go and sell it. Go and I'm happily will talk to a founder that's told me, well, someone will easily give you money if you walk into a boardroom and say, I've got 100 signups of this software. I need money to build this because people are willing to give me money tomorrow. Now, your pitch deck needs to be 5 slides long. Then it says, I have an idea. I've sold this idea. If we build this for X, we will get Y. And that really is what investors look for. So that's a very big component. And
so what would you have in those?
Is what?
Yeah. Okay. So I want to double down on selling this idea, because if you really believe, and this is like kind of going from my own experience, but like if you really believe in something and you're a good storyteller, you could sell it, right? Like you can, if you've got what do they call when you've got the gift of the gab, right? If you've got gift of the gab, you actually, that's a big part of being a founder, right? Is being able to sell it so vocally. But now I want to talk about that pitch deck, right? Because that is such an important part of the sales. That's going to, it's going to complement the story, right? Maybe there's people that aren't good storytellers. They need to rely on that pitch deck. So what, if there's only 5 slides, what do you put in there?
So you always start with why. And it's a great question. And like, I've seen really good pitch decks and I've seen really bad pitch decks, but there is a fundamental narrative that you should follow, or for like ingredients to put into it. You can maybe chop and change, but this is what I see that actually gets the most raises. You have to start with why. And how that does it, number one, it gets the audience it gets them invested in your idea. Why are we in this room? What is that problem statement? And the why is tied to the problem statement, and getting the size of that problem statement. So you've got to say, this is the problem that exists. This is why we are here. And also quantifying that problem statement. Now, because you're speaking to investors, you can't just look at it from your own view. You have to look at it from an investment point of view. An investment point of view is, what are my returns if I was to invest here? And that quantification of the market shows them, what are we talking about? Are we talking about a couple of $1,000s, talking about hundreds of $1,000s, or we're talking about a multi-million-dollar industry over here? So once you've told them the why, then you have to go straight into the what. And the what is really important, which is, what are we actually doing? What are we building? And also, what's interesting in this point, what are we building and what have I done to date? What has actually happened? What have you spent the last 6 months doing? I've built this app. I've got this churn. I've got this monthly recurring revenue. I went to 10 sales meetings, my conversion rate, all the things that you've done, you succinctly put in a slide or two. This is what Bobby has done. Then they're like, okay, this is interesting. And this is what Bobby wants to do. Then what's really important, which a lot of pitch decks miss, I believe, and is how. Is how. It is a very important slide, because everyone has a vision. And this is where you really have to panel beat. So you're here, your vision is here. You need a lot of capital to get here, a ton of capital to get here. You'll never get that capital. It'll be impossible. But you need a very pragmatic roadmap. I'm going to build this feature. I'm going to go to South Africa. I'm going to get 1,000 clients in South Africa. Then I'm going to test with other third world countries, such as, South America, Brazil, Indonesia, very similar economies, maybe to South Africa, and then move on. How does that look? And that's very important. That shows me that you've got a very practical way of going about doing this, because what's actually happened is a couple of years ago, there was a lot of money. There was a lot of money flowing into investments. And what actually happened was founders got millions of dollars without that practical roadmap. So what happened was they deployed capital into resources, because this is the best thing. The capital is always deployed into resources, which is hands. I buy developers, I buy this, I buy teams. And I think to myself as a founder, if I employ enough smart people, they will figure that out for me. And sadly, what happened is not always is the case that more hands make light work. It's not the case. And that's what happened. So that how is really important.
It's the operations, right? It's kind of, and this is what I've seen also, is that we have a very young generation of people trying to break through, right? We've got a lot of unemployment. They don't, like, you need to have been on the ground to understand the how. And I think I see gaps there, and why we need more people like my co-host Rainier, because he's been there, he's done it, he understands the how. Maybe the industry's changed, maybe the new technology has come along, but that how is so key. And I think a lot of people are missing that. And that's what we actually spoke about, funny enough, in the last episode, which was go work at a startup so you can learn the how, so you can get that practical experience of what it's going to be to move that how needle.
And that's why these smaller communities of colleagues, or talented individuals exist, because two ways to do it is you have to get do the rounds in the gym. You have to do the hours, go and lift the weights and go join a startup. The other way to hack it is make sure that you're spending enough time around other people, other founders that are solving the problems themselves, so you can steal their thinking and their learnings.
Not
and that's why
those
support communities. You can share it. You can share it.
Yes.
But once you've done the why, the what, and the how, then it comes to the last thing, is what you alluded to now, which is the who. It is the who. It is this the jockey that I am going to back? And do not discount this in your pitch deck at all. The amount of raises that have existed just on the who is significant, because a lot of investors also know that this is a beautiful pitch deck. And you'll also learn this if you ever raise on a pitch deck. This is beautiful. This is a great idea. I can guarantee you within 3 months of that pitch deck and getting that money, that pitch deck often moves aside, and we have to do business now.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's a good saying that the greatest plan just hits reality, and the plan will go out the window.
Exactly.
And that's actually what happens. So, and that's why the who is so important, because I can tell you now, within months of getting that money, or within months of starting, fires will emerge. And the only firefighters you have, or that investor has, is your team. Do they have the grit? Have they shown a track record? Can this jockey really run when they need to run? Are they going to do the hours? Are they going to think smart? Are they also not going to break up in the immediate future if you've got a founding team? That who, because often what you'll see is you might not build the business that was in the pitch deck, but that team together has, and that's why I believe in building a business is 80% logic and 20% magic. And that magic comes sometimes in that team chemistry. It's when these 3 people get together, or this one person goes into that room, people think in a very different way. People do things different. People are more optimistic. They can lead this team. And that's why that who is so important. And you must put your trials and tribulations when you put your team slide together. You must say what you did. You must say you ran a lemonade stand when you were 14 and you were taking over the neighborhood.
Yeah. Well, you made Obama floats. What's that? The Airbnb guys. You made Obama floats. Yeah. That's how we got our cash in, so we could keep this thing going. Yeah.
Exactly that.
Yeah. No, I like that a lot, Matt. We've kind of slowly run out of time. So what about forecasting? I think this is one of the biggest things. I think what a lot of investors are looking for is to say, oh, we're going to be 10 million Rand in 6 months' time. I don't know how people can even put that together. It freaks me out when I see that in a pitch deck. What's your view on that kind of that forecasting? Because the investors want to know, right? Like, what is it? How are you going to make that money come back? How do you approach that?
This is the dark art of forecasting for startups.
Yes. Tell me,
Um,
what's the secret? Is there
there is no
one?
secret, but what is really funny is the investors know that half the data or 90% of the data is a complete assumption. The investor
Mm,
knows this. The investor does know this, but you are 10% accurate. But
mm,
what I talk when I do these forecasting for startups is use whatever data you have available at first. You need some
mm,
data. What I mean by that is if you spoke to 10 people and 5 people said they were interested, that means you have a 50% conversion rate. That's a data point that you can use. So that means if
okay.
you were to speak to 100 people, you could get 50. And then, of course, you've got to make a little bit of a variance over there, significant
Mm,
variance.
mm, mm,
And what I do is for forecasting for teams to actually understand it also and to be truthful to yourselves. You also have to be truthful to yourself. Is you have you said you spoke to 10 people, 5 said they would buy your product. That means a 50% conversion rate. But what you have is a confidence level. What is your confidence level in that assumption? Is it
mm,
30%? Is it 40%? Put a confidence level there. And a confidence level will go up based on, how many times you've had that conversation. The more data points,
mm,
the higher confidence you
mm,
have.
mm.
Um,
I think,
but what it is,
yeah.
yeah.
No, I was just thinking, like, also, if you go and chase, for example, like, I know pricing models of conversation all for an episode on its own, but if you've got some sort of data on selling it at this price, then you can start slowly doing a forecast. So and lowball, right? So, start low so that you can be realistic about it.
That's
I
it.
suppose that's a good way to go about it as well.
And also never do one forecasting, one pricing model. Always take a high road and a low road.
Mm,
You've built the model, like you will build this model. There's definitely an opportunity, and I often see this with pitch decks and forecasting, is there's best case scenario and there's worst case scenario. So best case
mm,
scenario is we're charging $20 per user per month. Worst
mm,
case scenario, $5 per month.
mm,
And it's very important to actually forecast those high and low limits. And even looking at competitors in the market, like competitors in a space, what are they selling for similar features? There's another data point that
mm.
you can work with regards to
Yeah.
pricing. So whatever you can borrow, as Bobby says it, use whatever data you can borrow, use
Yeah.
it. But
Yeah.
do know and do not worry that there's a lot of assumptions in your forecasting. Your forecasting will not be accurate. It is a small component. Often the other elements of your pitch deck will need to be considered and they will be scrutinized before the commercial model will be. The commercial model is often going to be the last thing that is scrutinized in your pitch deck.
Okay. Interesting. Matt, I think we could actually carry on going because I remember just doing a project with you where we were just scourging, looking for other competitors and understanding what they were doing so that we could, kind of figure out our way to go about it. So there's a whole conversation there. But anyways, it's been great chatting to you again, and we'll probably have you on again, I suppose. But thanks for joining. It's been awesome.
Thank you. Thank you, Bobby. It was really good.